Good evening, my little creatures of the night. Mr. Wendigo back again with your late night creature feature. Before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you listening from tonight? Alone in your room? Driving through empty roads? Drop a comment and let me know. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now then, let's see what tonight's tale brings us. The floor. The Voss Lehman Deep Field Array, 1,400 feet below the Kola Peninsula in a complex that used to belong to the Soviet Ministry of Geology. The Russians had abandoned it in 1992 after drilling the deepest borehole on the planet and deciding, for reasons nobody ever published, to stop. Nora Feld had been down there about 7 months. 7 months of fluorescent light, recycled air and food that came out of sealed pouches and tasted like the memory of food. 7 months of datasets and calibration runs and conversations with the same 11 people about the same 4 topics. Weather they couldn't see, sports they couldn't watch, food they didn't have. And the array. Always the array. Nora was not the kind of person who spooked. 38 years old, 2 doctorates. One in theoretical physics from MIT, one in applied mathematics from ETH Zurich. She'd spent 3 years at CERN and 2 at Fermilab before Voss Lehman recruited her. The salary had too many zeros. The pitch, if she was being honest, was irresistible. She'd also needed to leave Fermilab, that part she hadn't mentioned in the interview. His name was Daniel Park, graduate student. 24 years old when she took him on, 26 when he withdrew from the program. She'd seen his potential before anyone else did, and she'd pushed him accordingly. Longer hours, higher standards. The kind of pressure she'd always told herself was how you made someone great. He sent her an email the week he withdrew. 11 lines. Polite. No accusations. He thanked her for her time and said he needed to step away for a while. 6 months later, his mother called the Fermilab administrative office looking for someone who might want to know. Nora kept the email, still had it, read it sometimes at 2 in the morning when the ventilation hum wasn't enough to keep the quiet away. She'd read it so many times she could recite it. 11 lines. Polite. The worst part was how polite it was. So when Lyndon called from Geneva, she listened. "We're not looking for particles," he said. "We're looking for the floor. The floor, the bottom of physical reality, the point where matter stops being matter and starts being math. Where spacetime isn't a fabric anymore but a foam, and the foam isn't a structure anymore but a probability, and the probability isn't a number anymore but a question that the universe is asking itself. Over and over, every Planck second of every Planck length in every direction at once." Lyndon wanted to listen to the question. Nora wanted to hear the answer, wanted something big enough to justify the cost of everything she'd done to get here, something that mattered enough. She hadn't found it yet. But she was 1,400 feet underground, and she was still looking. The crew was small, 12 total, but only 6 mattered to this story. If you'd met them, you'd have thought they were the most boringly competent group of people on the planet, which they were. That was the point. Lyndon ran the show. Dr. Carl Lyndon, 61, silver hair that he wore a little too long for a man his age, a physicist who still believed the universe owed him a revelation. He'd been chasing the floor for 30 years, published 14 papers, got laughed out of 2 conferences, kept going. Nora respected that about him, the stubbornness. The absolute refusal to accept that maybe the floor wasn't there. Okonkwo was the engineer. Chidi Okonkwo, 44, built the detection array with his own hands over the course of 2 years. Big guy. Quiet unless he had something worth saying, which meant when he talked you listened. He had a daughter back in Lagos named Adayise who was 7 and had just started playing football. He kept a photo of her first game taped to his monitor. Yellow jersey, too big for her, grinning so hard her eyes were almost shut. Every Sunday night, Okonkwo would video call home and Addy's would tell him about practice and he would listen with his whole face. The connection was terrible 1,400 feet down, but he never missed a call. Not once in 7 months. Petrov was the Russian liaison. Arkady Petrov, 63, had been with the Ministry of Geology before it dissolved, which meant he was one of about 4 people alive who really knew what the Soviets had found when they drilled the borehole. Or rather, what they hadn't found. Nothing, Petrov would say whenever someone asked, his face completely flat. That is official answer. Also only answer. Then he'd take a sip of his tea and let the silence do the work. Nora was about 70% sure he was joking. The other 30% kept her up at night sometimes. Yun was the youngest. Dr. Ji-Yun Yun, 26, fresh off her doctorate at Caltech, first real posting. She turned down 3 other offers to come here because she truly believed in what they were doing. Not just the science, the mission. She believed they were going to find something nobody had ever found. She was right about that. She just didn't know what finding it would cost. Nora watched her sometimes, across the lab, and thought about Daniel. And then there was Marsh, Neil Marsh, 51, systems technician, the guy who kept everything running. Generators, life support, communications, the elevator that carried them 1,400 feet to the surface and back. Marsh didn't care about quantum foam or Planck lengths or the floor of reality. Marsh cared about voltage regulators and air filtration and whether the backup generator would kick in if the primary went down. He'd been doing this kind of work for 20 years at remote installations, everything from Antarctic research stations to deep-sea rigs. He had a tattoo on his left forearm that said, "No stupid," and when Nora asked him about it once, he just said, "Reminder," and went back to checking the breaker panel. They ate together every night at 7, all 12 of them around a long table in the mess hall, which was really just a room with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs and a kitchen that produced food you could technically call food if you didn't think too hard about it, but that hour was sacred. No shop talk. No data, just people being people 1,400 feet below the surface of the Earth. For a group of physicists and engineers stuck in a concrete box under the Arctic Circle, they were funny. Genuinely funny. Petrov told stories about his ex-wife that may or may not have been true. She had apparently once chased a postman down the street in Murmansk with a frozen fish because he delivered a package to the wrong apartment. Petrov told this story with absolute deadpan conviction, and nobody could ever tell if he was serious. Okonkwo showed pictures from Adaiza's latest football game. She'd scored her first goal the week before, and the video was 30 seconds of blurry smartphone footage that somehow contained more joy than anything Nora had seen in a year. Okonkwo watched that video maybe 40 times. Showed it to everyone, twice. Yun and a postdoc named Rivera argued about whether the facility's meal plan counted as nutrition or punishment, a debate that had been running for 4 months with no resolution in sight. Yun's position was that a meal plan that included neither color nor texture was a human rights violation. Rivera's position was that Yun had never worked a field station in her life and didn't know what real suffering tasted like. This argument happened every single night with minor variations, and nobody ever got tired of it. Marsh ate quietly and efficiently and was always the first to leave, which everyone respected because Marsh was Marsh and that was that. But even Marsh had his moments. One night, Yun knocked over her water glass and it rolled off the table, and Marsh caught it without looking up from his plate. Just reached out and caught it. Didn't even break his chewing rhythm. Yun stared at him for about 10 seconds, and Marsh said reflexes and kept eating, and that was maybe the funniest thing that happened all 7 months. Lyndon sat at the head of the table and watched his people and smiled. That quiet, satisfied smile. Everything he'd worked for was about to happen, and he could feel it coming. The first 6 months were boring. Gloriously, tediously, productively boring. Calibration, noise reduction, baseline readings that confirmed what every other detector on the planet already knew. Neutrinos passed through. Cosmic rays filtered down. Quantum fluctuations did what quantum fluctuations always do, which is everything and nothing at the same time. Then, on a Tuesday in November, at roughly 11:40 in the morning, the array picked up something new. Not a particle, not a wave, not a fluctuation or a decay event or any of the 13 categories of detectable phenomena the system was designed to catalog. Something else, something underneath. Nora was eating a granola bar when the alert came through. Peanut butter flavor, the cheap kind from the commissary that stuck to the roof of your mouth. She remembers that. She remembers the granola bar and the hum of the ventilation and Okonkwo at the next station telling a story about his daughter's first soccer game. Normal sounds, normal morning. The last normal morning, though she didn't know that yet. The reading lasted 4.7 seconds and then it was gone. Huh, Nora said. And that was it. That was the beginning of everything. They spent 3 days analyzing the data. Nora and Yun worked in shifts, 18 hours on, 6 hours off, cross-referencing every baseline reading they had against those 4.7 seconds of anomaly. Lyndon hovered. Okonkwo ran diagnostics on the array itself, checking for hardware faults, calibration drift, anything that could explain it as noise. It wasn't noise. It's structured, Yun said on the third morning, her eyes red from screen glare and not enough sleep. Whatever it is, it has a pattern, not random, not decay. Something organized underneath the quantum foam. Lyndon's hands were shaking. Nora noticed that. Not fear. Excitement. The kind of excitement that makes a person dangerous because they stop asking whether they should and start asking how fast they can. Increase sensitivity, he said. Full spectrum. I want everything the array can detect running at maximum resolution. Carl, Nora said, we should take a beat. We've been taking a beat for 6 months. Increase sensitivity. Okonkwo looked at Nora. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. Okonkwo went to adjust the array. The second reading came on a Thursday. 11 seconds this time. Same structure, same pattern, stronger, and there was something in the waveform that hadn't been there before. Nora stared at it for a long time before she could articulate what she was seeing. It's not constant, she said. The pattern. It changed during the reading. Look. She pulled up the 2 waveforms side by side. Tuesday's reading was static. Thursday's reading shifts at the 7-second mark. Here. See that modulation? Yun leaned in. That could be interference from the... It's not interference, I checked. Nothing in the facility produces that frequency. Lyndon was already at the terminal. Then we probe it. Okonkwo, can the array send targeted pulses? It's a detector, Okonkwo said. Not a transmitter. Can you make it one? Silence. Okonkwo looked at the ceiling, which was his way of running calculations. Then he looked at Nora, then back at Lyndon. Give me 12 hours. Okonkwo modified the array in 9. What he built, and Nora still doesn't fully understand it, he essentially reversed the detection matrix, turning the most sensitive listening instrument ever built into a focused pulse generator capable of sending targeted bursts of energy into the quantum foam, into the floor beneath the floor. They sent the first probe on a Saturday morning. A single pulse, 0.3 seconds, aimed directly at the depth where the anomaly had appeared. Nothing happened for about 6 minutes. Then the array lit up. Not a 4-second reading this time, not 11 seconds. The return signal lasted 41 seconds, and it was. The word Nora used later was responsive, not reflected. Not echoed, responsive. The signal they got back had been shaped by what they sent in. Their pulse went down as a question and something down there answered it. Lyndon stood very still. His hands weren't shaking anymore. Again, he said. Carl, Nora stood up. That was a reaction, not an echo, not a bounce. Whatever is down there, it responded to our probe. That changes the equation. Yes, it makes the equation infinitely more interesting. It makes it dangerous. We don't know that. We don't know it isn't. Lyndon turned to her. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not arrogance, not recklessness. Something deeper. Something that had been waiting 30 years to arrive and was not going to be talked out of staying. He was not going to stop. Again, he said. They probed 5 more times that weekend. Each time the response came faster. Each time the signal was more complex. By Sunday evening, Yoon had mapped what she called a conversation topology, a branching pattern in the responses that suggested the thing beneath the quantum foam was not just reacting but adapting, learning the shape of their questions. Marsh came into the lab around 9 that night. He didn't usually come to the lab. He stood in the doorway and looked at the screens and then looked at Nora and said, "Power consumption is up 40% since Friday." "We're running the array at full resolution," Lyndon said without turning around. "I can see that. I'm telling you it's up 40%. The backup generator kicked in twice today. This facility was built for detection, not transmission. You keep pushing this and something is going to trip." "Noted. Thank you, Neil." Marsh looked at Nora again. She could see it in his face. He didn't understand the science, but he understood systems, and his systems were telling him something was wrong. She gave him a small nod. He left. Nora stayed at her station. She was watching the latest response data cascade across her screen, and she was trying to figure out why it bothered her. The signals were clean. The patterns were consistent. The conversation topology made a kind of mathematical sense that was honestly beautiful. But there was something in the modulation at the tail end of each response, a tiny shift, a frequency wobble that lasted maybe 2/100ths of a second and then resolved. Yoon hadn't flagged it. Lyndon hadn't noticed it. It could easily be noise. Except it wasn't noise. Nora knew it wasn't noise because noise doesn't repeat at the same interval. Noise doesn't increase in amplitude by exactly 0.03% each time. Noise doesn't feel like something turning its head. She didn't say anything. Not yet. She sat in the lab and listened to the hum of the ventilation and the click of Lyndon's keyboard and the distant groan of granite settling around them, and she thought about a word she hadn't used in a long time. Observation. In quantum mechanics, observation doesn't mean watching. It means interaction. It means reaching into a system and changing it by the act of measuring it. Every physicist knows this. Every physicist accepts it as a fundamental constraint of the discipline. You cannot measure a thing without touching it. You cannot touch a thing without changing it. This is not philosophy. This is math. Nobody talks about what follows from that. Not at the conferences, not in the papers. Nobody asks the question that Nora was asking herself at 11:30 on a Sunday night, 1,400 feet below the surface of the Earth, watching frequency wobbles tick up by 0.03%. Nobody asks what happens when the thing you're observing starts observing you back. Monday was quiet. Lyndon wanted to run another probe, but Okonkwo needed 6 hours to recalibrate after the weekend's barrage. The crew ate breakfast together. Petrov told a story about a mining crew in Norilsk who dug too deep in 1978 and hit a pocket of gas that smelled, according to his telling, like the Earth's own stomach. Everyone laughed. Yoon knocked her water over onto her laptop, and Marsh produced a roll of paper towels from somewhere on his person with a speed that suggested he always carried paper towels, which, knowing Marsh, he probably did. Normal morning, almost. Nora noticed it around 10. She was walking from the mess to the lab, a route she'd walked maybe 400 times, and the corridor felt wrong. Not dramatically, not obviously. The fluorescent light on the ceiling about halfway down was flickering. It had never flickered before. And the distance from the mess door to the lab door felt, maybe, about 2 steps longer than it should have been. She counted on the way back. 47 steps. She'd never counted before. She had no baseline, but 47 felt like too many. She didn't say anything. At 2 in the afternoon, Okonkwo finished recalibration, and Lyndon sent the 7th probe. The response came back in under a second, fastest yet, and this time there was something new in the waveform. Not a pattern, not a modulation, a gap, a space in the signal where data should have been but wasn't, a pocket of nothing in the middle of something. "What is that?" Yun asked, pointing at her screen. Nora looked. The gap was clean. Perfect edges. Not corruption, not dropout. An absence that had been placed there with precision. "It's a null zone," Nora said. Something in the response is, "I don't know," redacted. "Signals don't redact themselves," Lyndon said. "No," Nora agreed. "They don't." Yoon ran the analysis twice. The null zone was identical in both passes. Same location, same dimensions, same perfect edges. Whatever was down there hadn't just responded. It had responded selectively. It had chosen what to show them and what to withhold. That was when Nora felt it for the first time. Not the frequency wobble, not the 2 extra steps in the corridor, something else. A pressure behind her eyes that came and went so fast she almost missed it, like 2 fingers pressing in behind the sockets from somewhere that had no physical address. A flutter in the air that had nothing to do with the ventilation. The feeling of being in a room that was slightly too full, even though only 3 other people were in it. She took off her glasses and pressed her fingers into her eye sockets, and the pressure went away. But not before, in the fraction of a second it lasted, she heard something, not with her ears, from somewhere below hearing, a tone she recognized. The frequency of a voice she hadn't heard in 2 years. She was on her feet. She didn't know why. Heart going, hands flat on the console. She stood there for about 4 seconds before her brain caught up and told her it was nothing. Pareidolia of the mind. Pattern recognition misfiring under stress. She sat back down, made herself look at the screen. The null zone pulsed once. Steady, regular. Then it stopped. Lyndon sent the 8th probe at 4:15. The lights went out. Not a flicker, not a brownout. Full blackout across the entire facility. 1,400 feet of granite above them in absolute darkness. Someone swore. Nora heard a chair topple. Then the backup generator kicked in and the emergency lighting came up, red and dim, painting everything the color of a dark room. Marsh's voice came over the intercom about 30 seconds later. Calm, professional, the voice of a man who had weathered worse. Main power tripped. Backup is holding. Everyone stay where you are. Give me 10 minutes. It took him 8. The lights came back. The systems rebooted. The array came online. Everything normal, except... Nora. Yoon's voice was careful, controlled. Come look at this. Nora walked to Yoon's station. On the screen was the passive detection log, the background readings that ran constantly whether they were probing or not. During the 8 minutes of blackout, while the main array was offline and only the passive detectors were running on backup power, the thing beneath the quantum foam had sent a signal. Unprompted. Not in response to a probe, not a reaction, an initiation. It had reached up, while they were blind, while their instruments were mostly dark. It had sent something and the passive detectors had caught the edge of it. The signal lasted 7 minutes and 42 seconds, almost the exact duration of the blackout. Nora looked at the waveform. Her mouth went dry. It was looking at us, she said, while the lights were out. It was looking at us. That's anthropomorphizing, Lyndon said from across the room. No. Nora turned to him. That is exactly what the data says. We poked it 8 times. On the 9th it poked back. Not at our instruments. At us. At the facility. It sent a signal directly into the structure of this complex during the only window and we couldn't see it doing it. The room got quiet. Even Lyndon didn't have an answer for that. Petrov, who had been sitting in the corner reading a technical manual and apparently paying no attention to anything, looked up and said, "In 1989, the drill team hit 12,000 meters. The temperature readings stopped making sense. They pulled the drill string. The foreman wrote one line in the log. It does not want us here. They sealed the hole the next week." He paused. I always thought he meant the rock. Nobody spoke for a long time after that. They should have stopped. Nora knew that then and she knew it now, and the knowing hadn't gotten easier with time. They should have shut down the array, packed their equipment, ridden the elevator 1,400 feet to the surface, and filed a report that said, "We found something, and we are not equipped to deal with it." That would have been the rational thing, the safe thing. But Lyndon was already pulling up the probe interface, and Yoon was already running correlations on the new signal, and Okonkwo was already checking the array alignment because that was his job, and Okonkwo did his job. And Nora stayed because if something was going to go wrong, she wanted to be in the room when it did, not because she could stop it, because she needed to understand it. They sent probe 9 at 8 in the morning. Ji Yeon died at 8:14. Nora was watching through the glass partition that separated the main lab from the corridor. Yoon had stepped out, heading toward the mess, her laptop bag over one shoulder, her water bottle in her right hand. Nora could see her clearly through the glass. Yoon took a step. The step didn't finish. Her foot went down and the floor was there. Nora could see the floor. The concrete was there and solid and real, but the distance between Yoon's foot and the concrete became vast, wrong, impossible. She dropped into a step that should have covered 6 inches and she fell. Not through the floor, not into a hole, into the space between her foot and the ground. A space that opened up and kept opening. Nora hit the glass with both palms, hard enough to hurt. She screamed Yoon's name and the sound came out wrong, too loud, trapped in the lab, and Yoon couldn't hear her or couldn't do anything about it, or both. The water bottle shattered on the concrete and the sound was normal. The sound was fine. Plastic on floor. Nothing wrong with that sound at all. But Yoon was falling into a distance that had no right to exist. Nora saw her face. Surprise. Not even fear yet. Just the pure confusion of a foot that expected solid ground and found infinity instead. Yoon looked up at Nora through the glass for 1 second. 1 second of eye contact, and then she was just getting smaller. She fell for about 3 seconds. Her body got smaller, not further away, smaller, compressed. The space folded around her and she diminished into it. And then the space closed and the corridor was a corridor again, and the concrete was concrete, and the water was spreading in a thin puddle across the floor, and Yoon's laptop bag lay on its side where it had slipped off her shoulder. Nora stood at the glass. Her hands were still flat against it. She was screaming. She didn't know when she'd started. She could feel it in her throat and hear it bouncing off the lab walls, but it sounded like it was coming from somewhere else. From someone she didn't recognize. The glass was warm under her palms. She hadn't noticed that until now. 26 years old, first real posting. She'd believed they were going to find something nobody had ever found. She'd been right. What followed was about 2 hours of controlled panic. Lyndon wanted to evacuate. Okonkwo seconded. Marsh tried the elevator. The panel said the surface was 912 floors up. The facility had 12. "That's not possible," Marsh said, his voice the calmest thing in the room. "Check the comms," Lyndon said. Marsh checked the comms. Dead. Not static. Not interference. Dead. The radio produced silence. The satellite uplink produced silence. The hard-wired backup line that ran through the borehole casing and up to the surface relay station produced nothing at all. "Something is wrong with the distances," Nora said. Everyone looked at her. The elevator reading, the comms. "Yesterday I counted the steps from the mess to the lab and there were too many. The space inside this facility is changing. Not a lot, not fast, but the relationships between points are shifting." "Shifting how?" Okonkwo asked. "Getting bigger, I think. Or the rules that govern how distance works in this specific volume of space are being edited." Petrov stood up. "I am going to check the manual relay on level 3. It is hardwired. Separate system. If anything works, it works." "I'll go with you," Marsh said. "No." Petrov was already moving. "1 person is a scout. 2 is a target. I know this facility better than anyone alive. I will be back in 20 minutes. He was right about knowing the facility. he was wrong about the 20 minutes. They heard him on the radio for the first 11. His voice was calm, professional, the voice of a man who had spent decades in underground facilities and was not going to let a dead elevator rattle him. He reported his progress. Level 8, Level 7, Service Corridor B, stairwell clear, walls intact, temperature normal. Then, at about the 12-minute mark, his tone changed. "Nora, I'm here, Arcady. The wall in corridor B7 is warm." Nora looked at Lyndon. Lyndon looked at the floor. "How warm?" she asked. "Body temperature, approximately." A pause. "It was not warm this morning when I checked the filtration unit in this corridor. The concrete was cold, standard. Now it is warm." And what?" "It is vibrating, very slightly. I can feel it through my palm, like a pulse." "Arcady, come back, now." "One moment. There is something on the surface of the stain." His voice went strange, wet. Not wet from emotion. The sound itself became wet, thick, drowned. The wall is not." "Arcady? It is moving. The wall is moving. It is not." The transmission ended, not with static, not with a cut, with a sound that Nora would carry for the rest of her life. A soft sound, like two wet surfaces pressing together and becoming one surface. A merging sound. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. Okonkwo's hands had gone flat on the console the way Nora had put her hands on the glass when Yoon fell, white-knuckled, needing something solid. Lyndon stood in the middle of the room with his mouth slightly open, which was wrong on his face, which was always controlled, always composed. Marsh stood in the doorway. He was already doing the math. You could see him doing it. Where is B7? How far? Can I make it there and back? His hand was on the doorframe and she could see the knuckles going white. "Don't," Nora said. He went anyway. 20 minutes later. Because Marsh went. That's what he did. Telling him not to was the same as telling him to go faster. He took a flashlight and a pry bar and walked into the stairwell and came back 9 minutes later. He didn't say anything. He sat down in a chair and put his hands on his knees and stared at the wall for about 4 minutes. Then he spoke. "He's in the wall. Corridor B7. About waist height. I could see his face. His eyes were open. His mouth was. He was saying something. Or trying to. The concrete around him was moving. Slow. Expanding and contracting. Rhythmic." "You mean he's behind the wall?" Lyndon asked. "No. He's in the wall. Part of it. Merged. The concrete and him. There's no boundary between. His hands are in the wall and the wall is in his hands and I couldn't tell where one started and..." Marsh stopped, looked at the floor. His eyes followed me. Nora walked to the corridor doorway. She didn't plan to. Her legs took her there. She stood in the opening and looked down the hall toward the stairwell. The red emergency lighting made everything the same color. Nothing visible from here. Just concrete and pipe, and the dark below the stairs. She needed to go look. She needed to see it with her own eyes and make it a data point instead of a story Marsh was telling. That was how she handled things. Data points. Controlled observations. She got to the stairwell door, pushed it open. The corridor was the same, walls intact, lights on. Petrov's footprints still damp on the floor from when he'd walked this way 20 minutes ago. She walked down to B7. He was there. Marsh was right. Waist height, both hands submerged to the wrist, the concrete surface around his forearms smooth and continuous, as if the wall had simply grown to include him. His face was turned slightly toward the corridor, and Marsh was right about that too. His eyes were open. His mouth was moving. Whatever he was trying to say, the concrete had swallowed the sound. Nora stood there and looked at him. She was very calm. That was how she worked. Observe first, process after. Then the light shifted a euro, just a flicker. the red emergency strip stuttering once a euro, and in that half-second of different light, Petrov's face wasn't Petrov's face. It was younger, dark hair, still wearing glasses, a 26-year-old she'd last seen at a Fermilab seminar when he'd come to say goodbye, his mouth moving in the same way. Still trying to say something she couldn't hear. The light stabilized, Petrov's face again. Nora walked back to the lab. She made it back. She was not sure later exactly how, but she made it, and she sat down in her chair, and she pressed both hands flat on the desk and stared at them, and she didn't say anything for a long time. Nobody asked her to. They could see something in her face that made them not ask. She understood, fully, completely. Not just the physics, something worse than the physics. It had found her. Whatever was underneath the quantum foam, whatever had been looking at them for days, turning its attention toward the facility like something surfacing toward a vibration on water. A euro, it had found the specific shape of her, had looked through her and identified what was there, and now it knew exactly what it had. She was going to have to be very careful, because it wasn't going to waste what it found. The math said one thing. They hadn't found something at the bottom of reality. They had alerted something at the bottom of reality to the fact that it was being observed. The probes hadn't detected a phenomenon. They had poked a substrate. The quantum foam wasn't a phenomenon. It was a membrane. And beneath the membrane was something that had been perfectly content to remain unobserved for approximately 13.8 billion years. It wasn't hostile. That was the part that scared her worst. A hostile entity has intent. A hostile entity is choosing to harm you. What the data showed was something else entirely. The spatial distortions, the distance shifts, Yun, Petrov, these weren't attacks. They were adjustments. The way you'd shift in your chair if an ant crawled onto your arm, not malice. Not even awareness, exactly. Irritation so far below the level of conscious attention that it barely qualified as a response at all. They were the ant, the universe was the arm, and they had spent a week tapping on the arm with increasing enthusiasm, asking it to notice them. It was starting to. Nora felt the pressure behind her eyes again, longer this time, 4, 5 seconds, a heaviness in the air that had nothing to do with the ventilation. The fluorescent light above her station flickered once and then stabilized, but when it came back, the light was different. Not dimmer, not brighter, a different temperature, warmer. The light had shifted about 200 Kelvin toward the red end of the spectrum, and if she hadn't been a physicist, she wouldn't have noticed, and that was exactly what was happening. Small shifts. Adjustments so minor that an untrained eye would dismiss them, but each one meant the same thing. The rules in this volume of space were being rewritten, gently, gradually, an unconscious scratch at an unconscious itch. She found Marsh in the generator room on level 9. He was checking the backup power connections, which was either a profound act of faith that the normal rules still applied, or a profound act of denial that they didn't. Neil. He didn't look up. Yeah. I need you to check something for me. The server room on level 10. Is the temperature reading accurate? He checked his tablet. Says 18 Celsius. Standard. I need you to go down there and physically verify. Bring a thermometer. He looked at her then. She could see the calculation in his eyes. Going alone to level 10 meant passing the corridor where Petrov was. Meant walking through spaces that might not behave the way spaces are supposed to. He was a man who understood systems, and his systems were telling him that the system was broken. He went anyway, because Marsh was Marsh. He made it to level 10. He called up on the radio. 18.2 Celsius, nominal. Check the gravity readings on the environmental panel. A pause. Where's the environmental panel? West wall. Gray box. Third from the left. Another pause. Longer. Nora, there is no west wall. What? The room is round. The server room is rectangular. It has always been rectangular. I have been in this room maybe 200 times. It is rectangular. It is not rectangular now. It is round. The servers are arranged in a circle and they are running and the lights are on and everything is functioning, but the room is round and She heard the sound before he described it, through the radio. A deep, low groan that wasn't mechanical and wasn't geological and wasn't anything she could categorize. A sound that came from the structure of the room itself, from the shape of it, from the fact that a rectangular room had become a round room and the geometry was still settling. Neil, get out of there. Something's wrong with the... His voice changed. Higher, faster. Nora, I'm on the ceiling. I'm on the ceiling. My feet are on the ceiling and the servers are below me and I'm not. I didn't jump. I didn't. Gravity just... Neil, it's selective. It's only me. The chair next to me is on the floor. The cables are hanging down. Only me. Only my... The sound he made next was short. A grunt that turned into something wet and thick and wrong. The kind of sound that only happens when things inside a body move somewhere they were never designed to go. Not everything. Not all of him. Selective, he had said. And he was right. The gravity reversal was precise. His skeleton stayed where it was. His skeleton was fine. Every organ not anchored to bone pulled upward at once. His ribs didn't go. His spine didn't go. Everything soft went. Fast. The difference between his voice before and after was the difference between a man and a room that used to have a man in it. It was fast. That was the only mercy. Nora was on her feet. She didn't know when she'd stood up. She was holding the radio with both hands, and she could hear herself saying his name. Marsh. Neil. Marsh. Like saying it enough times would reach back through the 60 seconds that had just happened and find a different outcome. It didn't. The radio gave her the sound of the round server room, the hum of machines. Nothing else. Neil Marsh, 51 years old, 20 years at remote installations. He had a tattoo that said "No stupid" and he carried paper towels everywhere he went, and he went to the server room because someone needed to and Marsh always went. He deserved a better death than that. They all did. She put the radio down, set it on the console, walked to the mess. She found Okonkwo at the long table, alone, staring at his phone. The screen was dark, no signal, hadn't been since the comms went down. But he was holding it the way he always held it on Sunday nights, propped against his plate at the angle that worked best for video calls. Chidi. He didn't look up. Tomorrow is Sunday. She sat down across from him. The fluorescent light buzzed. The table was still set from breakfast that morning. Petrov's tea mug was there, half full, the tea cold and dark. Nobody had cleared it. Nobody was going to. "Adaze has a match tomorrow," he said. "Saturday morning matches. But she calls me Sunday to tell me about them. Every detail, what the other team wore, what the coach said. Whether the referee was fair." He smiled. Small, tired. "She is very concerned about fairness. She gets that from her mother. We're going to get out of here, Chidi." "I know." He put the phone down, flat on the table. Screen down. "I'm going to try the elevator again, and then I'm going to try the emergency shaft on level 2. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to find another way, because I have a phone call tomorrow and I do not miss phone calls." He looked at her then, steady, clear. The look of a man who had built detection equipment with his own hands for 2 years and was now going to apply that same patience to not dying in a concrete box under the Kola Peninsula. "What happened to Arkady?" he said. "And Yoon? And Marsh? Can you stop it?" "No." "Can you understand it?" "I'm starting to." "Then understand it, and I'll find us a way out." He stood up, took Petrov's tea mug to the kitchen, washed it, set it on the rack to dry. Then he walked toward the elevator. She sat in the lab in the red emergency light and she understood, fully, completely. Not just with her mind, with her body, her bones. The understanding was physical and total. The probing hadn't found the floor. The probing had scratched the floor. and now the floor was scratching back, not at them specifically. They were too small for specificity. The universe doesn't target ants. It shifts. It settles. It adjusts the local conditions until the irritation stops, and they were the irritation. Every spatial distortion, every distance shift, every alteration to the rules of the facility was the cosmic equivalent of a flinch, involuntary, unconscious. The universe twitching in its sleep because something very small was poking it and the poking was starting to register. And if it fully woke up, Nora didn't finish that thought. She didn't need to. She found Lyndon in the main lab. He was at the array terminal. The screens were alive. He was preparing another probe sequence. "Carl, we need to talk about shutting this down." "Shutting what down?" "The array. The probes. All of it. 3 people are dead. The spatial distortions are accelerating. The distances inside this facility are changing faster than I can measure them. I walked from the mess to here and counted 61 steps. It was 47 yesterday. It was 39 the day before that. This building is growing, Carl, or the space inside it is. And every time we send a probe, it gets worse." Lyndon didn't turn around. He was running calculations, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the focused precision of a man who had been typing equations for 40 years. "That's correlation, Nora, not causation. 3 people are dead, and their deaths are a tragedy. But we don't stop the Hubble telescope because a technician falls off a ladder. We don't shut down CERN because someone gets electrocuted. Science has costs. It always has. A technician falling off a ladder is an accident. Yun fell into a gap in space-time. Petrov merged with a concrete wall. Marsh's organs reversed their gravitational orientation while his skeleton stayed put. These are not accidents. These are responses." Lyndon stopped typing. He sat very still for about 10 seconds. Then he turned to her. Nora thought about that look every day afterward. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't recklessness. It was the look of a man who had spent 30 years in the dark and just seen the first light. A man who had been told over and over that the floor wasn't there, that he was chasing a phantom, that reality was probabilistic all the way down and there was no bedrock underneath the math. And now there was. Something was down there. Something organized. Something that could hear him. He was not going to stop. "The array can send a sustained burst," he said. "Everything it has. Not a probe, a declaration. If it's going to notice us, Nora, then let's make sure it sees us clearly. That will kill us. We're already dead. You just said so. The irritation doesn't stop until we stop. So either we stop, or we make it see us. Really see us. Not as an itch. As something worth noticing." Nora looked at the screen behind him. The response data from the last probe was still up, and it was different. She could see it now that she wasn't arguing. The conversation topology that Yun had mapped had expanded into something vast and branching. The null zones were gone. Whatever the thing beneath the quantum foam had been withholding, it was giving now. All of it. Data pouring across the screen in cascading waveforms that carried information density beyond anything human instruments had ever recorded. It was beautiful. That was the worst part. It was genuinely, mathematically beautiful. Nora didn't get the chance to argue. Lyndon had already initiated the sequence. The array was already spinning up. The facility groaned around them, the granite above and below and on every side conducting the vibration of instruments being pushed beyond their design limits. And the screens were filling with waveforms, and the response signal was building and building, and the lights were flickering, and the temperature was climbing, and somewhere deep beneath them, far below the bottom of the borehole, far below the crust and the mantle and the molten core, far below matter and energy and space-time itself, something that had been still for 13.8 billion years was becoming aware that it was being looked at. It opened. That was the only word Nora could find for what the data showed. The quantum foam didn't part. It didn't tear. It opened, the way an eye opens. The floor wasn't beneath them anymore. The floor was looking up through them, through the rock, through the facility, through the instruments and the granite and the 1,400 feet of earth, and the snow on the surface, and the atmosphere and the void beyond it, looking at everything, seeing everything. And in the fraction of a second that the looking lasted, every rule that governed the behavior of matter in this specific volume of space was suspended, not broken, suspended, held in abeyance, considered. And then it found her. She felt it the way you feel a hand close around your throat, a euro. Not pain, not yet, just the sudden knowledge of being gripped. The pressure behind her eyes came back, but this time it didn't come and go. It pressed in and stayed. And from somewhere below sound, below language, from a place where meaning existed before words existed to carry it, she heard something that had no right to know her name. Not her name, worse than her name, the shape of her, the specific configuration of what she'd done and what it had cost. And then she heard Daniel's voice. Clear, the way she remembered it from seminars. The precise cadence of a 24-year-old who was always slightly too careful with his words because he wanted to get things right. Just a sentence. The last sentence of 11 lines. Thank you for your time. Nora was across the room. She didn't remember moving. Her back was against the far wall and her hands were up and she was making a sound she didn't recognize as coming from her own throat, a euro. Not a scream, not words, just sound. The kind that happens when the mind exits and the body takes over. Lyndon was still at the terminal. The screens were still scrolling. He hadn't noticed. He was somewhere else by now anyway, his eyes fixed on the data with an expression that had stopped being his. She looked at him, his face. Something was behind his eyes that was very large and very still. It was wearing Lyndon the way you'd pick up a pebble to examine it, briefly, with no particular interest in whether the pebble survived the examination. And it was looking at her. She ran. Down the corridor, away from the lab, not toward anything, just away. Her legs knew before she did. She hit the stairwell door at full speed, bounced off, got through it, took the stairs 2 at a time down toward the lower levels. She ran until her lungs failed and she stopped in a corridor she didn't immediately recognize and bent over with her hands on her knees, breathing in ragged pulls. The red emergency lighting turning everything the color of something wrong. She hadn't run from anything in her professional life. Not once. Not from a failed experiment. Not from a failed student. Not from 11 lines of polite, devastating goodbye. She'd always stayed and observed and processed. That was who she was. She was not that person right now. She was just a body in a corridor, 1,400 feet underground, shaking. Okonkwo. He was at the elevator. He'd pried the doors open with the manual release. The shaft was there, solid, real, the rungs of the maintenance ladder visible in the red emergency light. He'd started climbing. Nora could see him from the corridor end. His big hands on the rungs, his boots finding purchase, his body moving upward with the steady mechanical efficiency of a man who had been climbing things his whole life. He looked down at her once. His face was calm, determined. "Get Lyndon," he called down. "I'll have the doors open up top." She nodded. She watched him climb. He was 20 feet up, then 30. Then she could see the distance between them stretching. Not the shaft, not the rungs, the space. The air between his boots and her eyes was expanding, each rung carrying him not 3 feet further but 30, then 300. Then a distance that had no number because the math that governed distance in this column of air had been rewritten while she watched. Okonkwo kept climbing. He didn't know. He couldn't see it from his perspective. He was just climbing, rung after rung, getting further away, his body getting smaller in her vision. Not because he was far away, not the way things get small with distance. He was being diminished, compressed, reduced. The space was taking him in and he was shrinking into it, and he was still climbing. She could see his hands moving, his boots finding rungs. And he was the size of a child, and then the size of a doll, and then the size of a point, and then he was gone. The shaft was empty. The rungs were there. The air was normal. His daughter's name was Adaze, yellow jersey, too big for her. Grinning so hard her eyes were almost shut. He never missed a Sunday call. Not once. Not in 7 months. He wouldn't be calling this Sunday. Nora leaned against the wall of the elevator shaft and slid down it until she was sitting on the floor. Cold concrete. She pressed the back of her head against the wall and looked at the ceiling. The red light buzzed. She sat there for a while. She didn't know how long. She was trying to get back into her own head. The physicist's head. The head that made data points and drew conclusions and stayed in the room and observed. It was harder than it had ever been, because the thing looking at her from below wasn't looking at her data. It was looking at Daniel, and it was patient, and it knew she was still down here. She made herself stand up, made herself walk back toward the lab. Lyndon was standing at the terminal. The screens were still active, the waveform was still building, and his face was different. He turned to her and he was smiling. Not his smile, not Carl Lyndon's smile. Something was behind his eyes that was very large and very still and had been looking at the world through those eyes for perhaps 30 seconds or perhaps forever. It was hard to tell with something that did not experience time the way time was supposed to be experienced. "It's beautiful, Nora," he said, but the voice was wrong. Not the pitch, not the tone, the depth. The voice came from a place behind the vocal cords and behind the lungs and behind the body, from somewhere so far down that the word down lost all meaning. "Carl, it was always here. We were always in it, swimming in it. Every atom, every thought, built on its surface. Do you understand? We are the foam. We are the fluctuation. It doesn't sleep beneath us. We sleep on top of it. And we have been so loud." He said one word after that. One word that Nora heard with her ears and felt in her teeth and understood in a place beneath understanding. A word that was not in any human language and was not meant for any human mind and carried with it a weight that was not information but presence. The raw, undiluted presence of something that had just realized it was not alone in the house it had been living in since the house was built. She would never repeat that word, not because she forgot it, because she understood what it would do to anyone who heard it. Some words are load-bearing, this one was structural, and the structure it supported was not meant to hold human weight. Lyndon sat down. He closed his eyes. He stopped being alive. No marks, no trauma, no violence. His heart simply stopped. His lungs simply stopped. His brain simply stopped. Everything that made Carl Lyndon a living man just ceased. Quietly, completely. A switch turned off, a window closed. Nothing dramatic, nothing violent, just done. The facility went silent. Not quiet, silent. The generator stopped. The ventilation stopped. The hum of the fluorescent lights that had been the baseline sound of her existence for 7 months stopped. Total silence. The kind that you feel in your chest because your heart suddenly sounds very loud and very fragile in the dark. Then the elevator chimed. Nora stared at the display. Level 1. Surface. The number shouldn't have been there. 20 minutes ago the display said 912. Now it said 1. Clean, simple, correct. She didn't trust it. She stood in the lab with Lyndon's body in the chair and the screen still scrolling data, and she didn't trust the elevator because why would it work now? Why would the distances correct themselves? Why would the rules come back? Unless the irritation had stopped. 3 people merged, or compressed, or unmade. 1 erased from existence. 1 emptied out and shut down. 5 sources of observation removed from the system. And Nora standing in the red light. The last one. The last pair of eyes looking at the data. The last conscious observer in 1,400 feet of rock. The elevator chimed again. Patient. Waiting. She walked to it. Slowly. Counting her steps. 39. The same number it had been 7 months ago when she'd first walked this hallway. 39 steps. The distance had corrected. The space was behaving. The rules were back in place because the poking had stopped. She stepped inside. She pressed the button. The doors closed. The elevator rose. 12 floors. She counted every one. She put her hands flat against the walls and felt the vibration of the motor and the cable and the counterweight, and all of it felt mechanical and normal and real, and she wanted to scream because she knew with her bones that real was a decision that could be revoked at any moment. The doors opened. The surface was there. The sky was there, gray and low and heavy, Arctic winter pressing everything into a single color. She walked out of the facility and the cold hit her and her lungs seized and the wind pushed at her and she stood in the snow and looked at the sky and the sky was just a sky. Just gray clouds and weak light and the far-off sound of wind across the tundra. The rescue team arrived 18 hours later. Helicopter, blankets. Questions she answered with the parts of the truth that could survive translation into an official report. Structural collapse. Permafrost shift. Systems failure. 5 dead. 1 survivor. The bodies were unrecoverable. That last part, at least, was true. The facility was sealed. The borehole was filled with concrete. The Voss Lehman Foundation issued a statement expressing deep regret, and the investigation concluded that the incident was caused by a catastrophic failure of the geological containment structure due to unprecedented permafrost, destabilization consistent with long-term thermal variance in the region. Nobody asked about the data, nobody asked about the array, nobody asked about the waveforms or the probes of the thing beneath the quantum foam that had opened its eye for 1 fraction of 1 second and seen everything. The lie went into the file. Everyone signed. Everyone nodded. Life went on. Nora moved to New York in February. Small apartment in Washington Heights. 4th floor walk-up. She chose it because the windows faced east and got morning light, and she could see the sky from every room. No basements, no underground parking, no subways if she could help it. She took cabs and walked and rode the bus and never once went below street level. She didn't tell anyone why. She didn't tell anyone about the Kola facility. She didn't tell anyone about the floor. She tried, once, to write it down, €1, sat at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a legal pad, and got 3 sentences in before her hand stopped. The words looked wrong, not wrong like lies. Wrong like they were too small, like trying to describe a color that didn't have a name. She went to a therapist twice, sat in the chair, talked about stress and career transitions and the difficulty of grief without specificity, couldn't say the real thing, stopped going. She made rules, simple rules. Don't look too closely at anything. Don't examine anything at high magnification for longer than necessary. Don't stare at the spaces between things. Don't ask what's underneath. The curiosity was still there. It would always be there. She was a physicist, and physicists look, but she could choose where to point her eyes, and she chose surfaces. She chose the visible. She chose the shallow end. It mostly worked. What didn't work was sleeping. What didn't work was that the pressure behind her eyes came back sometimes, faint, at the edge of perception, the way tinnitus lives at the edge of hearing. What didn't work was that when she sat in a room alone, she sometimes heard the ventilation and thought 1,400 feet, and her heart would go and her hands would flatten on the nearest surface, needing something solid, and she would sit there breathing until the room was just a room again. Sometimes it took a while. She stopped reading physics papers, stopped following developments in quantum detection, deleted her alerts, unsubscribed from the journals. If something was happening at the floor, she didn't want to know about it. She had chosen the surface. She was staying on the surface. But she kept Daniel's email, still on her phone, still read it sometimes at 2 in the morning when the apartment was too quiet. 11 lines, polite. She didn't know why she kept it. Maybe because it was the most honest accounting she had of what she'd done wrong, a data point, the truest one. She took the job at Mount Sinai in April. Pathology lab, quiet work, tissue samples and stain analysis, and the low hum of equipment that did exactly what it was supposed to do. Normal, controlled, small. Nobody down here was trying to poke the floor of reality. Nobody was sending signals into the quantum foam and waiting for something to answer. Just cells on slides, stained pink and purple, following the rules, doing what cells do. She was good at it. She was always good at whatever she put her mind to. That had never been the problem. On a Thursday in June, she was running a routine biopsy slide. Breast tissue, standard stain. She leaned into the eyepiece and adjusted the focus, and the cells were there, pink and ordinary, dividing the way cells divide, following the rules the way matter follows the rules. Everything fine. Then she felt it. Not in the slide, not in the cells, in the space between the cells, in the gap where the stain didn't reach, the gap that was just empty space, just the absence of matter between living things. Something in that space shifted. Something that had been still became aware that it was being observed. Nora pulled back from the microscope. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. The lab hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. A colleague laughed in the hallway about something that didn't matter. She looked at the eyepiece. She knew what was in there. She knew exactly what was in there. It had followed her up 1,400 feet and across 6,000 miles, and it had been waiting very patiently in the space between cells, in every gap in every sample she'd looked at for 3 months. And it had been waiting for her to look long enough, close enough, to give it a way through. This was the rule she'd made. Don't look too closely. Don't observe too closely. She'd known this moment was possible. She'd structured her whole life since February around not arriving here. She was here. She picked up the eyepiece. She thought about Daniel, about 11 lines, about the specific weight of knowing you push someone past what they could carry. She thought about Yoon, 26 years old and believing in something. She thought about Okonkwo's hands still moving on the rungs while the space ate the distance between them. She thought about Petrov in the wall with his mouth still forming words nobody could hear. She was a physicist. Physicists observe. That was the whole discipline. You put your eye to the thing and you looked and you wrote down what you saw and you did not look away. She put her eye to the eyepiece. The gap between the cells was infinite. She'd known it would be. She'd known since the pressure first came back, since she'd heard Daniel's voice the way something that's not a voice sounds, from a direction that wasn't a direction. It came through fast, through the lens, through the light, through the space between observation and the thing observed. It entered through her left eye, and the pain was absolute. Then the pain was gone. Then Nora was gone. And the thing that sat in her chair was not Nora anymore, but was wearing her very well. Her body was found at 7 the next morning by a custodial technician named Grace Delgado, who had been cleaning the pathology wing for 11 years and had never called in sick and would not be calling in tomorrow either, though she did not know that yet. Dr. Feld was seated at her station, upright, eyes open. Her left eye was clouded, a milky white opacity that spread from the pupil outward in a pattern that did not match any known pathology. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, her fingertips were dark, and from the base of her skull, extending down her spine and branching outward between her shoulder blades and along her arms and across the surface of the lab bench, a network of fine filaments had emerged, thin, white, fibrous, growing. They branched, they spread, they connected to the surfaces they touched and continued growing. On the bench beside her, her phone was face up. The screen was open to an email. 11 lines. The last line visible, "Thank you for your time." Grace Delgado opened the door at 7:02 a.m. She saw Dr. Feld. She saw the filaments. She took one step into the room. The filaments released. 7:07 a.m. Camera 9 experiences interference. Horizontal distortion across the lower third of the frame. 7:08 a.m. The distortion covers the full frame. Through the static, movement is visible. multiple figures. The geometry of their movement does not correspond to human locomotion. 7:09 a.m. Signal lost. In 1927, a physicist named Werner Heisenberg published a paper that changed everything humanity thought it knew about reality, the uncertainty principle. You cannot simultaneously know both the position and the momentum of a particle, not because our instruments are imprecise, because reality itself doesn't decide until you look. The observer effect is real, verified, replicated in every major physics lab on the planet. When you measure a quantum system, you change it. The act of looking forces the universe to make a choice it otherwise wouldn't make. Every physicist accepts this. Every textbook teaches it. It is one of the foundational truths of modern science. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Why? Why would observation change the system? Why would looking matter? If reality is mechanical, if it runs on math and nothing else, why does a conscious observer force a different outcome than no observer at all? Some physicists call it the measurement problem. Some call it the hard problem of quantum mechanics. A few, a very few, have suggested that the answer is simpler and stranger than any of the theories. That observation changes the system because the system is aware that it is being observed. Not conscious, not intelligent, aware. A sleeping body knows when a mosquito lands on its arm. A surface registers pressure, awareness without thought, response without intent. The universe, in this interpretation, is not a machine. It is a medium, and it does not like being probed. The Kola Superdeep Borehole is real. The Russians drilled it from 1970 to 1992, 12,262 meters deep, the deepest humans have ever gone. They stopped drilling in 1992. The official reason was funding cuts. The borehole is sealed now, capped with a rusted metal lid and bolted shut. And nobody has tried to open it since. Make of that what you will. Well, boys and ghouls, that wraps up another terrorific tale from the vault. Poor old Nora. 2 doctorates, 7 months underground, survived the whole damn crew, made it to the surface, got a nice safe job in a nice safe lab, and all she had to do was not look through a microscope. One rule. Just the one. Oh, so sad. How terrible. Just how we fucking love it. Hit that subscribe button. New creature features drop every day at 8 p.m. Central, and trust me, tomorrow's even nastier. Leave a like if you're going to think twice next time you look through a microscope, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? What keeps you up at night? Have you ever looked at something and felt it looking back? I'm always hunting for the next nightmare. Until next time, kiddies, keep your fires burning and your eyes on the trees. This has been your late night creature feature. I'm Mr. Wendigo. And hey, look on the bright side. At least Nora finally found the floor. Everything Lyndon promised, everything she went underground to discover, she found it, right there in the microscope. Staring back, turns out the floor of reality has eyes, and it blinks. Sweet dreams, kiddies. Sweet dreams.